Story 1. In 2019, I moved to a post-Soviet country for work, and there's this American diner I always go to on Saturdays for lunch. It's a one-of-a-kind place inside the city, owned by a half-Cuban guy who loves the USA. Not surprisingly, the place attracts a lot of American expats who want to feel at home. It takes me around 25 minutes to walk there from my apartment, but it gets extremely cold during the winter months, so I always take a taxi that drops me off next to a big mall on the opposite side of the narrow street where the diner is. It's hard to describe, but the best way to reach the restaurant's entrance is by crossing the fenced garden of an old wooden church. It's an Orthodox church from the 19th century, turned into a museum, and it's now surrounded by massive office buildings. The garden is small, and you can cross it in 3 minutes, and the exit gate faces the restaurant. During the winter, snow covers it completely. One Saturday morning in January, if I recall correctly, the snow was fresh on the ground, and as I was walking to the diner, I noticed some unusual footprints in the snow, as if someone had been walking in circles back and forth for an extended period. But there was nobody around, and all the office buildings seemed to be closed. All of a sudden, a man who had been hiding beneath the church reveals himself. He doesn't look hostile, but there's something extremely odd about him. He's wearing baggy jeans, a dirty hoodie, and a blue cap. Keep in mind, it was extremely cold, and his outfit wasn't suited for winter weather. He then approaches me, smiling, and starts walking by my side. Hey there, hey, where are you from? Don't be afraid, I like foreigners. The vast majority of the population there looks East Asian, so it's easy to tell that I'm not a local, and his English is surprisingly good. I keep walking in silence. You don't need to be afraid, my friend. I'm part of the couchsurfing community. I'm a nice guy. Look. He tries to show me something on his phone, maybe his couchsurfing profile page. Would you stay at my place? He asks. No, dude, thank you, I say. Then he goes, okay, would you give me some money to buy us both coffee? You don't have to come with me. At that moment, I was already in front of the restaurant and casually opened the door to enter. He didn't follow me. Yet 2 weeks later, same routine. Lunch at the diner, then back home. On my way, I decided to grab a coffee at a nearby place. As I'm walking to the shop, I hear someone following me. It's him again, wearing the same clothes. We make eye contact, and he starts laughing. Then he proceeds to do an extremely creepy thing. He hides behind a bus stop that has glass panels on the sides and just keeps staring. I mean, I could still see him. He was being a complete creep on purpose. I entered the coffee shop and told the barista, hey, there's a guy following me. The girl looked at me worried and said something to the security guard. It's common to see security guards in shops there. The man then entered the shop. The moment the door closed behind him, the barista looked at the guard, who immediately removed him from the place. They were so fast, it almost seemed like they knew him. Thankfully, I never saw him again. Story 2. This happened years ago, but the thought of it still keeps me up at night. I was walking through the hills of a provincial park with my dog during the winter. The sun set much faster than I expected, and well before I could get back to my car. Once the sun was gone, all I could see was darkness. I was walking slowly through a field when, out of nowhere, I had the most gut-wrenching, undeniable feeling that I was being watched. I turned around, and in the distance, I saw a figure just standing there, darker than the night sky around us. The instant I saw him, my stomach dropped. My body literally froze, and I knew in that moment somehow that he was coming for me. I grabbed my dog's leash, and we booked it. I mean full-on sprinting, full speed, up and down hills, around trees, and down embankments. I was running so fast, as if my life depended on it, and to this day, I'm still sure that it was. I made that 30 to 45 minute trip in 10. And all that stood before me, and my car, was this switchback. You have to go back and forth up if you want to reach the top. So once again, I'm giving it all I've got, running up the switchback as fast as I possibly can. Once I reached the top, I turned around and looked down, and who else but that same person was still chasing me. But did he go back up the switchback like any sane person would? Of course not. He started sprinting right up the middle of the switchback, headed straight for me. I screamed at him, but he didn't say anything, not a single word, just continued running straight at me. I am so lucky that my car was at the top of that hill because, just like in a horror movie, I dropped my keys and was fiddling with them, trying to open the door. Just in time, I got the door open, threw my dog in, and shut it behind me just as the guy reached us. And the best part is, there were no other vehicles parked anywhere around us. Where did this person park? Yeah, right next to me, of all places. Now this guy literally jumped into his truck just as fast. And to this day, I have never seen a better example of speeding out of there like a bat out of hell. He gunned the engine so hard that black smoke was blasting out the back as he swerved out of there, leaving skid marks behind him. I sat in the back of my vehicle for hours afterward, shaking and crying, knowing I was this close to whatever he had planned for me. So that's why I'm sharing this story, in the hopes that people won't ignore that gut feeling, the little voice in the back of your head that tells you to run. If I had ignored it that day, I never would have noticed him in time, and I would not have had the head start that I needed to escape. Always trust your gut feelings and intuition. It might really be the deciding factor in whether it's your final day on Earth or not. Story 3. This is an old story, something that happened to me almost 20 years ago when I was 23. I was writing for a popular budget travel guidebook series and mainly worked in Central and Eastern Europe. Depending on the time of year, I could be gone for several weeks or even several months at a time. I mainly traveled alone. I'd run into a few problems here and there, but my experiences were predominantly positive. I'd been working in the former Yugoslavia and was now on my way to the Czech Republic from Sarajevo. It's a long journey by train, so I broke it up into several overnight stops, Zagreb first and then Budapest, making each leg around 8 hours. It was late January and bitterly cold, probably a good 7 inches of snow on the ground, perhaps even more in some places. I was exhausted and battling the remnants of the flu I'd picked up in Split. I left Zagreb in the late afternoon and expected to reach Budapest by around 10 p.m. I bought my ticket in the travel center at the train station. When I boarded the car, about half the compartments were empty. There were definitely other people on it, but the train wasn't crowded. I managed to find a compartment to myself, so I spread out a bit and prepared for the long ride. The first part of the ride was smooth. I worked on some guidebook stuff, wrote in my journal, etc. However, a few hours into the ride, we passed over the Hungarian border and things started to go awry. I heard them before I saw them. They were a group of teenage boys, about 5 of them that I could see. And they were loud. I could hear them running through the train car, laughing, cursing, and banging on the compartment walls. They were loud and obnoxious, but it's not like it was the first time I'd been annoyed by a group of teenagers. I didn't look up and kept working on my writing. As time went on, they grew louder and louder. As they ran from car to car, they slid the train doors open with so much force that it sounded like a bomb going off every few minutes. Then the sounds got louder, and that's when I noticed they were standing outside my compartment, looking in on me. I could only see 3 of them through the small window, but there were definitely more than that. I'd seen them earlier. I glanced up at them, frowned, and then looked away. I learned that the best way to deal with that kind of thing was just to ignore them. I didn't want to encourage their behavior, but ignoring them seemed to have the opposite effect. "Girl," they hollered at me, "come have fun." My compartment door was closed, but they proceeded to mess with me by slowly opening it and pretending they were going to come in, then shutting it again. The chant changed from "girl, girl" to a much more ominous "we're gonna expletive you all night," followed by a bunch of slang words for female body parts. Some of the more universal ones I had no trouble understanding. At this point, I grew very nervous. How was I to know whether they were just messing with me or serious? I couldn't exactly leave. Doing so would mean walking through them, and they were blocking my entrance and my exit. Then one pulled out a pocket knife. He stuck out his tongue, ran the blade across it, and then pointed at me and grinned. The guy next to him made sexual hand gestures toward me and laughed. I tried not to show anything, but in my mind, I was quickly taking stock of what items I absolutely had to take with me if I made a break for it. My lack of reaction angered the one with the knife, so he switched from licking it to using it to penetrate the circle he'd made with his thumb and forefinger. "You like?" he called out. Part of me figured they couldn't really do anything. There were other people on the train car, after all, and they would hear me scream. Surely someone would come and help me, right? The conductor hadn't come through since we did the border crossing, so he was due for another trip as well. I figured I only had to get through the next few minutes, and they'd get bored and leave. It was at this point that I noticed the curtain on the door window. I know it sounds crazy, but that's when I lost it. I'd left the curtain open so that people walking by could see the compartment was occupied. But now all I could think was that if they came in, all they'd have to do was pull the curtain, and nobody walking past would see what they were doing to me. At least one of them had a knife. They all were taller and bigger than me, and they outnumbered me. I started to tear up. Would they kill me? Would I be seriously maimed? I was 23 years old and a late bloomer. I also had a history of sexual assault. I'd only had consensual sex for the first time a year earlier. I feared that more than death, and I feared pain. My day pack was in my lap, and the only things I had in there for weapons were fingernail files and a butter knife. I reached into my bag and fumbled around until I had one in each hand, just as they slid the door open and the first guy stepped inside. The knife pointed at my crotch. Another voice filled the corridor. I didn't need to speak the language to hear the anger. The guys ran from my compartment, one dropping the knife, and I watched as a middle-aged man dressed in blue stomped after them. A few seconds later, the train came to a grinding stop. The world outside was creepy. All I could see was snow and blackness. There were no lights in sight. After a few seconds, the train started back again, and thankfully, the boys didn't return. I was just starting to feel some relief when the man in blue returned to my compartment. "English?" he asked, and I nodded. "I made them leave. They're gone." Story 4. Some background. I'm a male in my late 20s living in northern Canada. Last weekend, I got a call from a friend telling me while riding a skidoo, he went by my cabin as it was on his route. He said it looked like somebody had broken inside and smashed out all my windows. I was devastated and went out to my shade to load up my own skidoo and sled with boards and tarps to repair the windows, hopefully to keep some of the snow out of my cabin until I could properly replace the windows in the spring. Just as I was about to leave, I got this gut feeling that something was really wrong, that I should take a rifle just in case. Better safe than sorry. As I started the ride into the woods, I noticed the sky was getting darker and darker, and I thought to myself, great, now I'll have to deal with a storm too. Luckily, it wasn't a snowstorm, but a thick fog that just rolled in. There's nothing more unsettling than being alone in the woods, encased in a thick fog, especially with God knows what around you. I finally got to my cabin, and sure enough, every single window was smashed. I unloaded my gear and got to work trying to secure my cabin as fast as I could and get the hell out of there. At some point, I felt like I was being watched, which gave me a lump in my throat because I couldn't see anything in this fog. I heard something moving in the trees. I automatically grabbed my rifle and put my back to the cabin, hoping that if something came out of the fog, I'd be ready for it. My initial thought was it was whoever broke into my cabin coming back under the cover of the fog to see what else they could take. But then I realized that no skidoo was approaching me. I would have heard 1 mile away, as it was so quiet out here. After waiting a while with no more noises coming from the woods, I got back to work. I fixed my windows and returned to my skidoo to get the hell out of there. After a short ride, I noticed what looked like potholes in the middle of the trail. It turned out to be polar bear tracks leading toward my cabin. That creepy feeling of being watched and the noises from the woods were a polar bear stalking me, and it was the actual culprit of the break-in at my cabin. What disturbs me most is that I would have never seen it coming with all that fog, and my rifle would have been practically useless against such a big animal. To this day, I feel very lucky to be alive.